You're listening to Out of Line with Caroline Lee, exploring offline realities with online personalities. Lisa Congdon is an artist, illustrator, and author of 7 books, including her most recent release, A Glorious Freedom: Older Women Leading Extraordinary Lives. Lisa is a swimmer, biker, animal lover, speaker, and advocate, and was named one of the 40 women over 40 to watch in 2015. On a more personal note, Lisa created the artwork for this podcast, and I feel so lucky to have Out of Line visually represented by her creativity. Lisa and her wife, Clay, live and work in Portland, Oregon, so we hopped on a Skype call to record our chat. Welcome. I'm so excited to have you on and get to talk to you a little bit. I was just thinking about how many years I've followed you on social media, which I've been calling Soch Mead lately, and I hope it catches on.
Do you listen to Two Dope Queens? Is that why?
No. Do they say that?
Two Dope Queens is like one of my favorite podcasts, and they call it Soch Meads, and it cracks me up every time.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, apparently, nope. I didn't know that it was from them, but.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they invented it, but they use that term a lot.
Okay, amazing. Well, I'm going to listen to the podcast today, and I have to know what it's all about. But I love that with following you on the social medias, that it's also been something that I've gotten to know you in real life as well, and kind of the weird dance of the online reality and the offline reality being two totally different things. So it's really fun to have you here and just kind of get to talk about that a little bit. And how many years have you been online, and how many years have you been an artist?
Okay, so I first sort of entered the online world back in 2004.
Whoa.
Which seems like an eternity. Well, although there are people from like live journal days who've been on since the 90s. So in some ways, like compared to some people I know online, it hasn't been that long. But of course, compared to a lot of other people, it seems like an eternity. So yeah, so in 2004, 2 things happened. I joined Flickr, which I always like to think of as like the original visual social media platform, even though it was so clunky and is now feels so antiquated. I mean, I don't know anyone personally who still uses it, but at the time it was like where you met people and posted pictures. And I also in 2004, maybe early 2005, started a blog. It's a different blog than I have now, but it was my first blog. And basically I was going through a period in my life around that time where I was experimenting with a lot of creative things. Like I started my first career when I was in my early 20s I was an elementary school teacher, and I did that for like 6 or 7 years. And then I went to work at an education nonprofit organization in San Francisco that worked in public schools. So I was still working in public education, but I was working more in an office. And while I loved my work and I was super passionate about education and social justice and all these things that the organization was working on, I felt like the sort of like creative, I don't know, I was dissatisfied creatively, or I felt like something was missing from my life. And to be honest, I might not have even known that it was creativity or whatever. So at the time I was sort of like in a searching place. I was in my early 30s. I was trying to figure out who I was and what I was about and, the meaning of life and all those things. And I just started experimenting with sewing and drawing and painting. And like, I have no formal artistic training. So this was all just like something I kind of did for fun at first. I took a few classes, and at the time, and this is in the early 2000s, internet was starting to become a space for people like me who were dabbling in new creative endeavors, and the sort of DIY movement was starting. And, blogs were starting. So people were starting to blog about art and craft. And I got really into reading those blogs and then I started one. And again, I had a full-time job. I had no aspiration to become a professional artist. This was all purely for fun for me. In fact, I sort of thought of myself as somebody who had really clunky, bad artistic skills.
Oh my gosh.
I was just sort of, well, it's funny at the time compared to how I work now. They were pretty bad and clunky, but I obviously, there was something there.
Yeah, it was in you. It's always been in you.
Exactly. And I remember my sister, one time I was over at her house, and this was probably in 2006, and I was drawing. And again, at the time, 11 years ago, my drawing skills were not nearly what they are today, but I was drawing, and she and my niece and nephew, who are now teenagers, were little kids at the time, and they were sort of mesmerized by watching me draw. And she commented to me later that, because I was sort of like technically the least creative person in my family. And she was like, oh, this thing has been in you kind of latent your whole life, because obviously it comes fairly naturally to you. You just need to practice. And I was like, that's a really great point. So the rest is history. I sort of like started making art around that time, was also on the internet at the same exact time, was sort of sharing my experiments. And then slowly I started getting inquiries from stores and different places and just individual people who followed me online and wanted to buy something that I had made. So by 2006, I sort of had my first show at this little shop in Seattle. And that was kind of the first time I remember identifying as like, oh, I am an artist. And I had really only been drawing and painting for a couple of years, and my work looked so different than it does today. And then by 2007, I left my job to try to make a go at making a living as an artist. And that was really hard for the first few years. I think people imagine that everything is seamless. Like they look at you now and they say, or any artist who's successful, and they're like, just assume you've always sort of worked that way. And it's surprising to me when I remind people that I struggled at one point, that
oh, absolutely.
People are like surprised, like as if I just sort of hopped out of bed one morning, decided I was going to be a professional artist, and like started making six figures or something. Like I think that it's just, people need to remember it never comes easily, and it requires a lot of hard work, and it did for me. And so, but 11 years later, here I am.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I as a side note, just from my own experiences, I often have found in the things that I've started and tried that it really takes me 3 years of, busting my ass to really keep working on something with a lot of intention and focus. And even then it takes 3 years for it to really be something that's profitable and something that is well known enough that people aren't just like, you do what? But it sort of has a reputation, and it has whatever the business is. And so, yeah, I think you're right. It can be very overwhelming, I think, especially since we're talking about social media, especially with social media, when you've got this sort of feed that shows all of the good, it can be really difficult to look at it and also see the struggle integrated into the story, and also to see like the evolution of where someone started and how hard they've worked to get to a point like where you are now, where you could quit your job and make six figures being an artist.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like both inspiring to people, but also like people who want to do it themselves. They look at when they understand, or when they begin to understand, that it takes at least 3 to 5 years to even sort of begin to make your mark. It can be like, oh, do I really like, you have to want it pretty bad.
It's so true.
And so because it can feel like daunting and overwhelming to people. And, there's so many people out there doing what we do now that it's very, that people also, I think, suffer from a little bit of like, how will I ever stand out or fit in, for that matter?
Yeah. Yep. That's so true. So when you started with like a social media online presence, was that something that you ever thought, this will be how people start to know me? This will be how people kind of find my artwork and get to know me in any sort of way?
Well, it's interesting, when I first started using, say, like Flickr, like way back in the day, for me, it wasn't even like, there was no, oh, I want to build an audience for my work. That sort of intentional thinking didn't come until later. And fortunately, it was around the time that Facebook and eventually Instagram popped up as places where there was this none of us knew it at the time, because whenever a social media platform begins, you never ever know how it's going to take off, right? Like there's actually a few of them that started and crashed already.
Sometimes I still get emails that's like, you have a new notification on Ello. And I'm like, Ello?
Oh my God, fucking Ello, man. That's so funny. I just am dying when I think about that. But anyway, so yeah, or Vine, or like a lot of these places that I think were predecessors to a lot of the platforms that we use today, or even like Periscope, now there's just all these live feeds on Facebook and Instagram. So that's what people use. In some ways, for at least people of my generation, Instagram sort of trumps Snapchat, so you just never know what your platform, what it's going to do for you. And so, but I must have had some sense that, and I think I did have a sense early on, or I understood that I needed to get onto platforms early, get my username, and try using them, because I understood that potentially this could take off. And part of why I have a lot of followers is because I've been, I call them kids, like millennials who, they have like 3 times as many followers as me, and they've only been on social media for like 4 years, right? I've been on social media for a super long time, and I have a decent following, but it's partly because I've been on it for so long.
Yeah.
That my following has grown over such a long period of time. And what I do isn't super gimmicky or like clean or curated or polished as some people. And that's probably why, and that's okay with me. I just like to be myself. But I understood in the beginning, yeah, these platforms have the power. And for somebody who's self-taught, I didn't come from an academic institution. I didn't have any connections in the art world. My only hope of making it was through social media. I didn't have money for advertising. I understood that this was this way that was free, where I could completely design my presence that had the potential to do amazing things for me. And I think that's part of why I focused on it. And I do it differently than some people do, but it has really, I wouldn't be where I am or who I am without social media. So in some ways, like going back to 2005 or 6, when I started thinking like, oh, maybe I could potentially someday make a living as an artist, I knew that when I, first had access to social media, that this was the way it was going to happen. Like, I think I understood it. Now, I didn't understand how far it would take me or the potential it had, but I understood on some level this was my only chance, because, because I was kind of a nobody. And I really do think it has both leveled the playing field for a lot of us who didn't come from art school and didn't have connections in the art world and were, maybe starting later in life. But it also, in some ways, like saturated the playing field. So I stand out because I started early on, and but I think it's harder now to like get on social media and make a name for yourself. You really have to have kind of something special, because there's so many people trying to use social media to like promote their creative business or their talents and skills. And when I first got on social media, that wasn't the case. Like I was one of the few people in the beginning. I've just been doing it for a long time.
That's so true. And I have heard people say kind of like well, it's too hard, so I'm not even going to try because it's so saturated. Or, I'm going to work my ass off and I'm going to pour my heart out and put it all onto the internet, and then no one's going to see it. And so I think that is definitely something that's quite daunting for artists and other people as well, who see social media as something that is crowded and everyone's taken all of the original corners. And yet there are still people that I find who are fairly new, and their work is amazing. Or even people like, I think of my friend Justina, who is an interior designer, and the work that she does, she's like blown up overnight in front of me. Like I've watched her. I remember when I had more followers than she does. And it's just that
Yeah. I remember when I had more followers than she does. Like, it's kind of nuts how there are certain people, and she's definitely a great example, who who literally there's something magical about what they do that people are drawn to. And so for those people, it's like pretty amazing.
Well, and it is so unique. Like what she does is, and what I think similarly, like what you do is so unique. When I see someone repost your work, I'm like, oh, that's Lisa's work. It's not samey. It's not kind of something that I see again and again. And I think people are really hungry for that. They want originality and they want something that is inspiring and shows a little bit of a different angle on the world. So with Justina, like, I mean, she was always like, oh, what I want doesn't exist, so I'm going to go create it. And I think that those people will always stand out and rise to the top because they are the ones who are really pushing what is original, and they're really pushing themselves to create what they want to see and not just kind of work with what's already there.
That's such a great point. I think that there's this idea of, like, if you can figure out what's different about what you do so that you're actually setting trends or you're diving into new territory, that's different than what people are already doing. Like, of course, there's nothing completely original, but I do think that the more different your perspective, the greater the chances that people are going to want to follow you. Because so many times, how like Instagram in particular suggests accounts that you should follow based on what you already follow.
Yes.
And I don't know about you, but sometimes I'll look and I'll say, oh, that's cute, but it looks like a million other things that I already see. Uh-huh. So I don't press follow. But if I see something that's like different or unique or like edgy in some way, I'm always more apt to follow that person. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people.
Absolutely. I so agree with that. So with you and with your journey of being online, since you have been online for so long, I'm really curious to hear, what has it been like to have the line between, real you and like online, offline, the online Lisa and the offline Lisa? Were they sometimes the same, or has there always been kind of a really clear differentiation between the two?
It's interesting. Like, I feel lucky, and then I feel like and this might just be an illusion that I carry around with me, but I do feel like I'm sort of one person, and that I don't feel sort of like there's a offline Lisa and an online Lisa. I really try. And sometimes I'll even, like, it has to be intentional. Like, I'll start to write a post and I'll say, oh, that doesn't actually sound like something I would normally say. So I make sure that I say it in a way that I would say it to somebody's face. And I think that for me, the part of why my followers like to follow me, or the ones that are sort of devoted, are because I am sort of this person who they think they know. So on the one hand, that's great, right? So people, they see me as a nice person, or somebody who's inspiring, or somebody who tries new things. And so I know this because I get a lot of comments and emails from people, and that's really wonderful. Like, I do feel like I want to project this, not a version of myself, but like just myself online, with all of my quirks and fears and things. That said, and we can get into a discussion about this idea that, that what people's perception of me is in a minute. But the good part of that is that I get to be my whole self. The hard part about that is that people do sometimes think that they know me, but they don't. Because there's only so much that people probably, they know that I'm a nice person. They know that I like to swim. They know that I'm devoted to making art. They know what I look like. They know that I'm married to a woman. They know that sometimes I struggle with, stress and anxiety. They know that, they might know lots of things about me, but you really can't know somebody's personality online. And I think part of what might happen for a lot of people, and I know that I kind of do this too, with like, if I admire someone and I'm following them online, I think I know them. Like, I think I know their personality, and people will sometimes come up to me at public events. And because I have a lot of followers and I've been online for a long time, and I show pictures of my face once every couple of weeks, people know what I look like. So people will come up to me either in public or at an event, and they'll say, "This is so weird because I know you, but you don't know me." And my gut reaction is like, no, you don't actually know me. And that never comes out of my mouth because that would be rude. Like, people don't mean it. People don't mean it in a weird way. And I actually had this event a couple of weeks ago here in Portland. It was called a drink and draw, where people just come and draw and have beverages and enjoy summer weather. And this woman came up to me and she's like, "I have to ask you, is it so weird that all these people are here because of you and we know you, but you don't know us?" And I actually did say at that moment, like, and I said to her, "I don't mean to be rude when I say this, but you don't actually know me. You know a lot of things about me. You know what even parts of the inside of my house look like, but you don't know me. You can't know somebody unless you hang out with them in person and you build a relationship with them." And I think it's dangerous on a couple of levels to assume that we know people. A couple of weeks ago, I made this post on Instagram that went viral, and it was about social media and how we often it can inspire us and make us, think in bigger terms about what our life can be, and those are all really positive things. But a lot of the time what social media does is it makes us feel terrible because we look at all these other people and we say, looking at their work or their life makes us feel like we're not doing the right things, or we're not doing it fast enough, or we're not working hard enough. And all of these things can actually be really damaging to us. And what really matters in life are your human relationships with actual human beings that you interact with when you're not on your phone. And the post was viewed like 50,000 times and got like almost 900 or 1,000 comments. Like, it's crazy. It was the most insane Instagram post ever. And it was just this little video I made that was like a hyperlapse of me writing some things that was like less than a minute long. And I think the reason it resonated so much is that social media is it's like this new place, right? Like, it's uncharted territory. We don't know what it's doing to teenagers. We don't know really, like, it hasn't been around long enough to even study the effects of it on us and how it causes some people to feel anxious and depressed. And, I think there's all these really amazing things about it. But one of the hard things is that we compare ourselves to other people, or we think that people live these perfect lives, and they don't. Everybody's life is wrought with a lot of hardship. Everybody's. Like, some people's lives are easier than others, but like, we all have pain. We all have things that happen. We just don't show all of those things online. And so it gives us this very filtered perspective. And I know I'm contributing to that to a certain extent. I try to be as real as I can, but I can't show everything about myself. I'm not going to take a picture of myself like sitting on the toilet.
Right.
I'm not going to take a picture of myself like, getting into an argument with my spouse. Like, this is, so to go back to your original question, I have to keep part of my life private. And that's for my own sense of privacy and like feeling like not everything is on display for people, but I want to share just enough of my life so that people understand I'm not perfect, but still people, or that I have this perfect life. It's such a tricky balance, Caroline. I struggle with it every day.
It's so, and it is, I'm hearing you loud and clear, because it is such a new frontier. It is something that we don't have years of data of this is how it affects your brain, or this is, social media affects your psychology in these ways. And especially, like you said, for even kids, I mean, for us, I'm like, well, at least our brains are
the first
enough.
Parts of our lives were, that's right.
We didn't have it at all. And so we at least have some sort of purity of our hardwiring in our brain. But for kids, I'm like, oh geez, like they don't even know what life is like without it. So it'll be really fascinating to watch the next generation grow up online and watch how they're different and what that looks like. But for us right now, I definitely hear you. It is such a weird line of, I want to be authentic. I want to be myself. I want to share things about me that are real and genuine. And that's one thing, like, I do for myself, and I know you do as well, is get political. I mean, I will talk about things that matter to me online, and I don't care if not everyone agrees. Whereas I think some people like to be more like neutral or Switzerlandy.
Yep.
And so I think for people who for people like us who actually do sort of speak out and stand for something, it's like, okay, well, I want to use this as something that is really an extension of who I am. But I think that's just it. It's an extension. It isn't you. And when someone comes up to you at an event you've created and says like, hi, I know you so well, it's kind of like, yeah, but if they hung out with you for a day, they might not like you at the end of the day because they might be like, oh, wow, your personality isn't, you can't put your personality in a feed online. You can put aspects of it and you can kind of hint at it. But humans are tangible as well. You can read a book, but I don't know what, T.S. Eliot was like to be with when we would eat a salad together on a Tuesday.
Exactly. Well, and I think too, like we're all sort of whole people with, with good parts and parts and bad parts and like demons and shadows and, special talents and things that we're afraid of. And, we're so much more complex. Even the most revelatory people online, even the people who sort of bare their souls and they are there, they are still so much more than what they show. And that is all to say, I think it's just people need to be really conscious of that all of the time. That when you feel affected, like let's say you're looking at a feed and somebody who does what you do has just had some accomplishment and you have a tinge of jealousy. Like, first of all, let's celebrate, the fact that, we all can have successes, but also that doesn't mean that person's life or career is perfect, and conversely, that it makes yours worse or bad or not as valid. And there's this way that social media sort of makes us think these things that 10 years ago we never would have occurred to us, or we never would have had access to the trajectory of somebody's art or photography career, for example, because there was no, you might know what was going on with your friend's career, but you didn't necessarily follow, 2,000 strangers who did similar things as you. So I just think we have to be so mindful of that, so mindful. And I, just like everyone, get caught up in all of the like sort of obsessively looking and, curiosity about what people are doing and then judging myself if, and I know that I am part of that on the other end too, that one time my friend Samantha Hahn, who's a fellow illustrator.
Oh yeah. I follow her. Her work is beautiful.
Yeah. She's an amazing fashion illustrator. Anyway, we were on the phone once. We talk periodically just to kind of compare or, just sort of like bitch to each other about this and that. And we got onto this topic of Instagram, and she was saying, and she was really candid when she told me this, and she was like really clear to tell me she wasn't telling me this to hurt my feelings, but that we were talking about comparison, and she was like, yeah, I know this woman who actually mentioned to me that she stopped following you because your life seemed so happy and great. You made her feel terrible about herself. And like, of course my heart sank because that's the last thing I want anyone to feel when they look at my feed. Right.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, I probed a little more, and this woman is like pretty accomplished illustrator, illustrates for the New Yorker, the New York Times, like to like clients that are on my dream list or whatever. Right. And that's just the point of it, is that like, it's all relative.
Yes.
And I bet you if I met this woman in person and we sort of got to know each other, we would probably have gotten along great. But that's the problem, is that we don't really know the other person, and we don't know that their life is also fraught with other things. Conversely, like there are people who are pretty negative online and just kind of do a lot of complaining, and that's also problematic. So it's just, I don't know. It's hard because you can only see a part of somebody.
Yes.
It makes me feel really weird and uncomfortable when people say they think they know me. I understand why they say it. I get it. But I think my message is you actually don't know anybody that you don't know in person and haven't spent time with. So just remember that.
Yes. Yep. I love that. I want that. I want everyone to chant that together, because it's so true. And I think that whether it's comparison or either the other side of things, I've unfollowed some people that are really close to me in my life. And I've actually told them, like, I haven't just done it and then been like, I hope they don't find out. I've said, this is going to be the weirdest conversation we maybe ever have, but I'm going to unfollow you. And here's why. And it's usually because I have such a hard time with the online personality that they create. And it's such a separation from who they really are that when I see their posts and their work online, I get angry and like kind of resentful, because I'm like, that's fake. That's not you at all. And it makes me like, be real. Like, that's bullshit. And it makes me mad when I see this online thing that they're creating that is such a kind of like separation from who I know them to be, and I know them really well, that I just kind of am like, it's better for me to love you in real life and just love who you are as a person, and not get mad every time I see one of your posts and just be like, why are you doing this? Like, what is it about you that feels like you need to create this thing? Because I know you, and I know what you normally wear on a normal day, and I know what your house looks like on a normal day, and I know what your relationships are like, and I know you, I know real you, and it makes me mad that you're trying to make this online thing that you're creating seem like real you. And that, I think, is also a really weird thing. And sometimes I even like laugh at myself, and I'm like, am I insane for thinking that that's healthy? But for me, it has supported me in my relationships with a couple of these people, where it has just given me more grace and more space to just love and accept them for who they are in my actual real life. Because, like you said, my actual real life is totally different than my online life. And even though my online life is an extension of who I am, it isn't me. And so getting to kind of choose ways that social media can augment my life, but the minute that it starts creating comparison or depression or any sort of anxiety where my life doesn't look as good as their life, or I'm resenting people I actually love because of the fake story that they're telling about their lives, then I'm just like, you know what? Then I've found myself being online far less this year, I will say, especially since the election. I've just been like, whoa, okay, whoa, like there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of energy running really hot right now. And so it's been really nice to kind of just go on maybe like for a few minutes a day, and then only post like twice a week, and just space it out a little bit and have it be less of a percentage of my life, It's a really weird, crazy thing that feels like it just keeps changing.
Yeah, it's funny. I can relate to a couple of things you said. First of all, I want to say that I am like 100% an advocate for unfollowing people who make you feel bad about yourself. Even if you know it's twisted, even if you know that you shouldn't feel bad about yourself, if following certain people makes you feel bad, then don't follow them. Like, until you can work on that, because there's no reason for that. You should really follow people who make you feel hopeful and joyful and inspired. So I am totally pro unfollowing, and also have unfollowed people who, for whatever reason, either because, they don't seem real to me, or because I know them in real life, and this other part of them feels inauthentic, or because they just are doing so many amazing things I feel terrible about myself, or whatever. I really feel like I have come to terms with that to a certain extent. Like, I really put blinders on and focus on my own career. I've gotten really good at not, occasionally I have, issues of jealousy or, admiring somebody, and I have to just sort of turn that off. But I'm getting better at it. Like, I do think there's a way around it, but I do agree that there's just times when you have to you have to unfollow people. I have had the same experience. I used to post, I remember I taught this class for artists on Creative Live, way back in 2014. It's only been 3 years, but I remember in the class saying, you don't want to post more than 5 or 6 times a day. Now that just seems insane to me.
5 or 6 times a day.
Yeah. And that's how much I used to post.
Wow.
Because I didn't have many followers or whatever. And there weren't that many people online at that time. And I remember now I would never post more than 3 times a day. And 3 is in an extreme situation where I have something to promote and I just happen to witness an amazing sunset and also whatever. Most of the time I post either nothing at all or once a day. And that feels like plenty. And I've really evolved in the last few years. And like you, especially since the climate online is so much more tense with the political situation, which I feel like I don't have the privilege of ignoring. But it also makes me want to pull back and take care of myself and actually go out and do some activism as opposed to just sort of ranting online.
Yep.
So I'm posting less too and spending less time online. In January and February, I was kind of obsessed with reading the news and scrolling through social media, in particular Twitter, and I got so burned out on it. And so now I'm spending so much more time offline, and I've been taking these hiatuses where I'll leave for 3 days.
It feels really good. It feels, even recently with all of the Charlottesville and everything that's happened since then, there were some days where I was really glued. I was reading Twitter, live feed constantly. And then I just started to go crazy. It was oh gosh, there's so much. And the people who are talking a lot online, they just keep talking more and more and more. And their intensity grows. And then it's almost what they're saying grows more and more extreme in their corner. And I just feel after a while, there's just sort of 2 sides and they're both yelling at the same time. And there's nothing actually, like you said, put down your phone and do something. That's been something that's been hard, but it's also been good to see that as a choice and to choose, okay, this is stressing me out. I haven't taken a breath in 2 minutes. So I'm clearly I'm stressed because I'm just holding my breath and reading Twitter. And so it's really important for me to put it down and do something. Go get involved with my real body and my real self, because it is super important, I think, and I know you do too because of your own actions, to use our voices in really powerful ways. But after a while, sometimes doing is more needed than just speaking, especially when everyone's talking at the same time. That is what I just start being okay, everyone's yelling on top of each other and we're not getting anywhere. So let's put down the phones. Let's actually channel all that energy into some action, and then we can go somewhere new, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. And I guess another question that I have for you kind of on this topic is, you've had so much of your life lived online now. And I know you calling them the kids, in terms of the millennials, what's it like to change a lot as a person and to evolve into different eras of life, into different seasons? What's it like to change when you're online? Does that make sense? Is that a weird question?
It's not. And I've been really lucky in that I haven't had to go through any sort of jarring changes. How you'll watch people who you admire, a blogger or an artist or whatever, and then they get divorced or somebody in their family dies or something really horrible happens. That's just I knock on wood. Mm-hmm. I've been really lucky that while I've changed, because I was in my mid-30s when I first entered the online arena, and now I'm almost 50. I've obviously changed. I look different. In fact, a couple weeks ago, I posted a couple pictures of myself when I was in my 30s or I just turned 40 and like, even, it looks like me, but it's like a much younger version of me. Like I'm aging literally in front of, hundreds of thousands of people. And that's both weird, but also cool. And I'll talk about why it's cool in a minute. And also my work has changed. And often people, and that's just because artists' work changes. If your work isn't changing, I think it's more problematic than if it's changing. And so people who've been following me since, 2004 on Flickr, and there are many, they're it's so interesting for them to watch the evolution of my creative process, even for somebody like you, who I've known for 6 or 7 years. Like, I'm always experimenting and trying new things. I mean, my work is my work, and there are definitely consistent things about it, but I'm always changing things up. And I think that's I'm writing a book right now about finding your voice as an artist that comes out in 2019. And so there's this way that you sort of find this place that there's certain things about what you do that are consistent. But if you get too consistent, you're going to get stuck, right? So you always have to be sort of changing things up. And I think that's what people want to see. They want, that's what engages folks who follow you, is just seeing that you're innovating and trying new things and stuff like that. So that's all been really positive. And I think that I also offer up a model for people of somebody who's, it's an alternative to this sort of like youth culture. I remember, which is weird to say because I'm only, 49 years old, but I also have a book that comes out in October that's called A Glorious Freedom: Older Women Leading Extraordinary Lives. And it's all interviews with, profiles of, and essays by women over 40 who are like basically doing incredible things or reflections on getting older. And I was interviewing Betty Reed Soskin, who's not somebody who has an online profile, but she's a Black woman who in Richmond, California, who's the oldest park ranger in the United States. She's like 96 or 97 years old.
Oh my gosh. Amazing.
Yeah, I know. And so one of the things that she said when I interviewed her was precisely that like she offers up, because people in general are working later and later into life, right? We're not retiring at a certain age and then just going to live in Florida. Like things change, like people are actually working until their 80s, and, we're healthier and healthier now because of advances in healthcare. And, so she is really a model for what it can look like for somebody to work until they're in their 90s. And I, in some ways, feel similar. Like, people have watched me go through the trajectory of my career from struggling to success. And I'm also somebody who had a whole different career before this one. So I sort of am a model for a different way of approaching your life. Because I think a lot of times we think, we have to have a career and it has to last until we retire, and then we retire. And that's really an old-fashioned way of thinking about things. Like, in reality, you're going to have at least 2 or 3 careers in your life.
So true.
Or ways that you spend your time. And people are watching me do that in real time. Even as an artist, I'm doing new things and forging paths in my career that are new all of the time. And people get to watch that happen. And they're watching somebody who's not 25 do it. They're watching somebody who's either older than they are, so they can see what it could potentially look like down the road, or they're watching somebody who's around their age and they're inspired by that because it makes them think differently about what's possible for them. And so that's the cool part of it, is that, it feels a little vulnerable sometimes to have people watch you grow up over the last 15 years. But at the same time, I also think that it's kind of cool for people, and it's cool for me to watch other people that I've watched online for a long time grow and change in their life and career. And I don't know, I think it's kind of can be inspiring.
Yeah. As an artist, I don't get to say, I'm going to create and you're going to buy it. Like, people are going to buy it as long as they want to. And what if they decide to stop? And what if it has to do with the fact that I am a different age, and so what I see and what I value is different to what they think is cool? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And, it's interesting. I have followers who are teenagers and in their 20s, all the way to women in their 60s and 70s. And so one of the and I think because I'm the age that I am, I'm sort of smack dab in the middle of that. And I have this sort of, work that appeals to younger people, but also work that appeals to older people. And sometimes it's different what appeals to each. Personally, I've definitely had those fears before myself,
Okay.
so I can relate. But I think part of how I deal with them is just remembering that the world is filled with a lot of different people, and that if you're continuing to be creative and innovative, there's always going to be an audience for your work, and it might change over time. I used to think 5 years ago, like, oh, in 5 years, I'm going to be dried up. People will have moved on. And yet I still continue to sell stuff, and my imagery continues to resonate with people. And part of that is because I'm changing and growing creatively and infusing what I'm learning in my life into my work. But part of it is that my audience is changing too every day. And maybe it's shifting to a little bit older. And so if you're attached to only appealing to one age group, then it might be true that at some point your work isn't going to be appealing. But if you remember that the consumer market and the market for supporting artists is huge, and spans many generations, you'll probably always have an audience as long as you're excited about what you're doing and that shines through. Because I think really that's what people are attracted to.
I love that, what am I attached to? It's almost like in assuming that I might wake up one day and the kids are like, oh, she's not relevant anymore. Like
she's not cool.
she aged out. What about everyone else who's aging with me? We're all in the same boat. I like that perspective, and it gives me a lot of, peace of just being like, oh, totally. That makes tons of sense. There's always going to be people who are connecting with what you and I and anyone else are doing, as long as we're creating something that speaks a truth to them and is resonant with us. I think that's actually the thing that is the biggest deciding factor in artwork is, does this feel real? Did the artist create this because of their own truth and their own journey? Or were they trying to make something just for money, or make something because
it was trendy or whatever. And I think that that people can see through that right away.
Yes.
And I've learned that lesson myself a few times personally. But but I think if you're making work for the reasons that you want to make it, and that of course, as a commercial artist, you have to pay attention to to what people are interested in. Of course, that should, to a certain extent. I think for fine artists, it's a little different, but for commercial artists, of course you should pay attention to the world and what's going on and what people are into. I'd be lying if I said that all of my art was purely internally driven. That said, I only focus on the stuff that is interesting or joyful to me, or something that I feel like I personally need to work through in my art. And inevitably, there's always a few things that I make that I'm excited about, and nobody seems to care about them. Nobody wants to buy it. Nobody's that excited when I post a picture on Instagram. But 90% of the time, if I'm into some idea, or I make a piece of work that's based on something personal or something that I'm passionate about, other people get excited too, and it turns into kind of financial gain for me at some point or another, in some way or another. But if you're so focused on your audience and not focused on what you're excited about, I think that's when you get into trouble.
Yep. I love that. And I'm really excited to hear about your book coming out, by the way. I think that's something that is one of those things that I'm really ready for our culture to start talking about and embracing, celebrating the people around us who are still living amazing, incredible lives. Because you're right, there is such a expectation of, okay, now you retire and you become a snowbird. It was funny the other day, my husband is from Australia and they don't have that term. And so he was like, what's a snowbird? And I was like, oh, that is a very American thing. It's this thing of you retire and then you move to Florida or Arizona or whatever. And so it was really funny, like, oh, that's a very culturally American phenomenon that we kind of retire and then we just like go and kind of hang out in a warm spot. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think for some of us that doesn't sound appealing. And what's possible if that doesn't sound appealing? Like, what's plan B? What's plan C? What is, we're in kind of this new era of anything goes. And so where's the path? Like, how do you follow a path when anything goes?
Right. And I also think there's other ways to think about that too. Like, I don't never had kids. Like, that's kind of a new thing now that women, even women in relationships, are choosing not to have children and to focus instead on travel and career and, or just not that you need a reason, but like that 20, 25 years ago even was like, that's what the expectation was. If you were a fertile woman, you had kids.
Absolutely.
And that's changing. And so like, I also feel like I can be a model for what it looks like to not have kids and still have this really full, joyful life. And, not that my life is perfect by any stretch, but I think that's like kind of an exciting thing to be part of, is just like being a person who lives a life that's a little bit unconventional.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought that up because you're so right. That's another one of those things that we're sort of starting to go, hang on a second. We don't have to follow the checklist. So was that something that you always felt within yourself, like, I don't really want kids? Or was there a point in your life where you made that decision?
It's interesting. I always wanted kids when I was younger. And then when I was in my early 20s, I realized I was gay. So I shifted my thinking about everything, because this was in the early 90s and I had no models. Talk about like having, being a model online for, people now. There was no internet then. I had no one to look up to, no one to show me what my path could look like. Mm. And I think that that's part of what kids get today, is they get to see people who are living in ways that are different than what they might have planned for themselves. So they get to see how things could look different for them and that it's actually okay. In fact, it's awesome, to live in a non-traditional way. But I didn't have that. And so in my head, I was like, okay, I can deal with the fact that I'm gay, but that's going to mean so many, like I had all these preconceived notions that my life was going to be hard, that I was going to have to live in the closet, that I, if I was in a relationship, I was never going to be able to get married. So I was actually super anti-marriage for a long time, because it was like, well, if I can't have it, nobody should have it. I went through this, definitely went through a lot of like sort of, but deep down inside, I really did want it. In fact, I wrote this really long blog post a few years ago when I got married about, I was like the most enthusiastic bride. People were like commenting online about that. And I was like, yeah, it's true. I am. And that's because like, I figured like I finally have this thing that deep down inside I've wanted all along. So marriage was this traditional thing that I wanted, and that fortunately now I can have, both in the legal sense and in the sort of symbolic sense. But early on, I was like, I'm never going to be able to get married, and I'm never going to be able to have kids. And then when I was in my 20s, it was starting to become more acceptable for, gay couples to either adopt or get inseminated. And the woman that I was in a relationship with for most of my 20s and into my early 30s, and I like explored this idea of having a kid. We ended up breaking up a few years later, so thank God that never happened, because kids sort of inextricably link you to whoever you.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm sort of like, she's a wonderful woman, but I'm just glad that we made the choice not to, because that, kid would have also had to deal with, us not being together, because the relationship was doomed. But anyway, I kind of, by the time I was in my early 30s, I, as I mentioned when we first started talking, I started on this creative path that led to my art career. And that really became how I spent my time outside of work. And I realized by the time I was in my mid-30s that I was so passionate about making stuff that I didn't have time for kids. And so it's not that I don't like them, but or couldn't see myself with them, or didn't, couldn't envision being a mom and thinking about how much fun that could be, I also was like, oh, I have all this other stuff in my life that I like to do. And I started, you and I share in common that we love to travel. And like that and making art became like how I wanted to spend my time and money. And of course, being in a relationship with the person that I met 10 years ago. But yeah, so I kind of shifted. I haven't always not wanted kids, but I realized as I got older that having kids was a huge responsibility. And I was watching all of my friends raise children and my sister. And I was like, oh, it's not for me.
Yep.
And it felt good to make that decision. And I think that more and more women, even women in traditional straight relationships, are making that choice now. And I think it's pretty awesome, because you should never have kids because you feel like you should. You should live the life you want.
Yeah. I have relatives who have kids, and I've even heard them say, I wish that I'd realized it was a possibility to not have kids. And that's, to me, is a really intense thing to hear someone that has children say. I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, you can't say that. You have them, But I'm grateful that they're being honest, because I think it's important. There is kind of an expectation, maybe just a kind of I don't know what the word is. It's just kind of this assumption, maybe, that people who have kids are so happy that they're parents. And I think that is very true. But I don't think it's always true. And so I think that to hear someone who has kids say, I kind of wish that I realized it was possible to not have kids. And I just did it because I thought that's what I had to do in society. I think hearing people say that is also important, because it breaks the expectation that, no, everyone who has kids loves it. It's for everyone. I don't think it is for everyone. I don't think it's for everyone. And I also agree with you. It's a huge responsibility. And I think taking it on also means that, there's a reason why I don't have kids yet. And because I know that I would have to completely change my life, and I would want to be super present to their needs and be able to nurture them in a way that right now I'm not interested in. Right now I'm nurturing businesses and my marriage and my adventure life of going around the world. And it's a choice. But I think, like you said, knowing that that's even possible to make that choice is a new conversation, but a very important one.
Right. Exactly. And I think that what we can offer other, young women who might follow us online is just like a different idea or a model for what their life can look like. And that's one of the ways that I think that we've been talking about what a sort of toxic place the internet can be. But there are, you and I practically live on the internet, like not less now than we did maybe 5 years ago, but like we have presences there. We've made a lot of friends there. We know each other through there, through the internet. So many positive things have happened for us because of the internet. And I think that there are so many really wonderful things about social media. And one of them is that, for example, in the African-American community right now, I was reading something the other day that there are so many regular people in the African-American community who are starting Instagram accounts, and that it's become this place for Black people to find each other and get inspired and organize, and so many things, and that are really wonderful. And that Instagram in particular has become this platform for Black people that's super powerful. I can't remember where I read this, but
that's awesome.
But that to me is an example also that like kids, have something to look at now that shows them possibility, or, they find, they want to be an artist and they find a Black artist online and they follow them. Like these things were not possible 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so it does, I think it, if you use it and you use your powers for good, you can really be like a model for younger people about what their life could look like. I had this one young woman who's in high school in the South in the United States email me, and she's like, basically she's gay, but she is too scared to come out to her parents. And she wrote me this super heartfelt email about how just like watching my life gave her hope for her life. I mean, if there isn't a reason to get out of bed every morning and do what you do, it's that. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
Like, that was sort of mind-blowing to me. Like, and I don't even think on a daily basis that I'm providing that for somebody. But I have to remember that it's true, and that's why it's important for me to be myself. Because that there are people watching, and so... And then I have like women who are older who are like, because of you, I started my own business, or like I got inspired that I could do this thing. And yeah, it's really hard work and I'm struggling, but like, thank you. And that's another thing that's just sort of, and so when you earlier were asking about what it's like to sort of like grow older in front of people online, I think that, yeah, it's hard, but it also is just, you don't know who's paying attention, and you might actually be helping somebody, in sharing your journey to like also get through their journey.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting because I'm just thinking about how amazing that is. And also how many people are out there that you're impacting that aren't even writing to you. It's right. with being a social media presence, there is kind of no way to measure your impact. Whereas I think with a lot of other careers, or even just in-person things where you're in front of someone, it can be easier to say, I saw how that affected them. Like I looked at it with my own eyes, and I was in a room and I saw everyone, and I kind of could gauge how that went. But when it's online, we only know what people tell us impacts them. And even then, how many people are either too shy or too embarrassed, or assume that it's not going to even reach you.
Or that you're never going to read it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so they just keep it to themselves, but you are still impacting them, and in their real life, like you're impacting her real day-to-day life, not her online life. You're impacting her reality, that she feels not alone. And that's like the most beautiful human experience possible, I think. That's really amazing. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Stick around for part 2 of this discussion, where we'll dive into the online portion of social media realities. This episode of Out of Line was produced by me, Caroline. All sound editing, engineering, and original music composition by Jaden Lee. And a big thank you to Cat Footwear for working with Out of Line this season. Hit subscribe to get the next episode on your mobile device when it drops next week. And if you love what you heard, please whip out a review, will ya?